Good morning to all of us. Thank you for joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Kara Jema, a Senior Agenda and GBV Specialist with ICRW Africa at the International Center for Research on Women. I'll be moderating our discussions today alongside my colleague, Dr. Eric Yegon, who is our Senior Youth and Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Specialist based out of the Nairobi office. This webinar for us really is key as it happens to occur during the time when the world is celebrating the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. And our theme this year globally is centered on women's leadership and participation within the public space. Our webinar today focuses on the place of women in leadership in the informal sector. We know a lot of attention has been given to women within the formal enterprises, but today we are looking at what is that place that women occupy within sectors that remain to be hidden in the country. I'll start us off by sharing some logistics, just how we will be running this session. We will have a 1.5-hour session that will start off with opening remarks, a brief presentation, a panel discussion, and we'll aim to have a session for question and answers just from the attendees, and then we'll have closing remarks. So for all of us who've joined us today, we've had all of us muted just to ensure that we are able to focus and listen into the different presenters as they speak to us this morning. However, we are requesting that you kindly use the chat box for any questions that you might have during the session. And also in case you have any tech issues, kindly use the chat box as well for our technical team to be able to reach out to you and support accordingly. Once we get to the panel session, we would request that you use the Q&A feature on Zoom to post their questions that you might have based on the presentations that would have been made by our panelists, and our colleagues from the International Center for Research on Women will be able to address some of those questions as we go along. We will try to get to as many questions as we can during this event. And towards the end of the panel session, we'll open up the floor for more questions from the participants. So we are really looking forward to a participatory engagement today. And kindly note that we've also are recording today's meeting, and we'll be able to share the recording with all the participants who will have registered to be part of this session today. So as I had indicated, we will start off by just having some few remarks. And at this point in time, I welcome our Regional Director, Dr. Cleopatra Moudoni, just to give us some few remarks and insights around today's webinar and the reflections that we are having towards women's participation in leadership. And thereafter, she will invite Ruth Rwanda, our representative from the State Department of Gender, with focus on Women Enterprise Fund. Over to you, Cleo. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everyone. I think most of us who are on this are early in the morning, or for East Africa, mid-morning. So good morning, and thank you for joining us. Now, as we know, women's equal participation in leadership, political, and social and economic life are essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But yet, women's leadership remains invisible in many contexts, both in the formal and informal setups. And while women make up half of our total global population, they only hold just 24% of senior leadership positions and only 4% of CEO positions globally. And progress on bringing women to these senior positions to the high table and into decision-making remains slow at the global level, and even slower in sub-Saharan Africa. So even as we talk about bringing women into leadership and bringing women into decision-making positions, sometimes we feel that the return on the gender investment is not well understood. And even though it's a discussion that that many are having, sometimes understanding the direct impact of having women in leadership really fails to be fully understood. We find that women tend to be underrepresented, like I've said, in decision-making cadres, and overrepresented in lower cadres and support functions. And these tend to be positions that have low pay and lack social protections. Many institutions, and this is both formal and informal, are set up to favor and propel men's leadership. So where men will dominate in leadership, and there is a high likelihood for a male-dominated culture, which can also perpetuate inequalities and unbalanced power relations that actually can lead to the victimization of women. And so these discriminatory social and gender norms will continue to hold women and girls from leadership and decision-making processes. And these challenges are seen and experienced both at local and global levels. So the lack of education, the digital divide, and overlooked care burden remain important elements of a woman's life that often lock her out of leadership. But we do see that where women are leading, they have been seen to improve lives and inspire other young girls into thinking about leadership positions. And we've also seen now with the COVID-19 response that women leaders are effective leaders. We can also see that women leaders care about the environment. They're making changes in the economic sphere and pushing for social protection that protects all members of their community and populations. So CSW 2021's theme is centered on women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence and for achieving gender equality and the empowerment for all women and girls. Here at ICRW, we are anchored on the principle of human dignity, where we advance gender equity, social inclusion, and shared prosperity. We generate research evidence to understand the causes, the forms, as well as redress mechanisms that can be applied at policy, institutional, community, and individual levels. So as we localize these CSW activities here in Kenya, there is a need for us to have a candid discussion on the gaps and opportunities for women's leadership in the informal economy in Kenya, and maybe even furthermore in East Africa, because we do seem to see some similarities in the three countries. And why the informal economy? The informal economy because it makes up a large part of our economies in the region, and women tend to be overrepresented in the informal economy. This webinar on women and leadership in the informal economy in Kenya will share some of the lessons that have been learned from ICRW's Rebuild project, which focuses on the impact of COVID-19 policies on women working in the informal economy. The project is actually a global project being implemented in Kenya, Uganda, and India, and we will be sharing some of the insights around Kenya right now. And so this webinar will provide us a forum to interrogate the status of women in women's leadership in the informal economy, look at the barriers that hinder women from active leadership, the barriers to formalization of their businesses, and how women's voices in this sector can be amplified and their contributions recognized so that we can have a more vibrant and inclusive sector. And it is my hope that this webinar will begin to provide us with answers on how we can make women the center, put women at the center and at the front of leadership in socio-economic facets, both locally and globally. I welcome all of you and look forward to your active participation and fruitful discussions during this webinar. I would like now to hand over to Ruth Randa, who is our representative from the State Department for Gender. Over to you, Ruth. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Carol and Dr. Hari, for this opportunity. I'm here to represent the State Department of Gender, and just to pass the regards of our PS, Professor Pauletta Suda, together with the Chief Administrative Secretary, Honorable J.B. Kelimo, who will be joining us as soon as they're done with the launch of the National Policies on Gender meeting. Thank you very much, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to be part of this team who advocate for gender and women empowerment in Kenya, and more so for the opportunity to represent the department in this webinar for International Center for Research on Women in Leadership in the Informal Sector in Kenya. And this is aligned to the CSW theme that the department has localized, which is women's full participation and decision-making in public life, as well as elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and women empowerment of all women and girls, sorry. As we are aware, 60% of the world's employed population earn their livelihood working in the informal economy. And the informal economy exists in all countries, irrespective of the individual's country, social economic development, but it is more prevalent in developing countries. Globally, informal work is greater source of employment for men than women, but despite that, women are more vulnerable, often found in more vulnerable categories of work. When we look at the street vendors, domestic workers, subsistence farmers, and seasonal agricultural workers, you realize that a bigger percentage of them are women, and therefore women make up a disproportionate percentage of workers in the informal sector, thus increasing their vulnerability and reducing their chances to access finance and services. As we strive to address the gaps in the informal economy, which our strategy will not work for all women entrepreneurs, and it is with this in mind that the government of Kenya, through the Ministry of Public Service and Gender, has developed and put in place a number of programs aimed at increasing the productivity of women enterprises, primarily through increasing access to finance, business and technical skills, and these the State Department of Gender, under which the Affirmative Action Funds are domiciled, coordinates the activities of the Affirmative Action Funds, namely the Women Enterprise Fund and the Uwezo Fund, that were established to offer affordable and accessible credit to women for enterprise development. And this also is to enhance their financial inclusion in the informal economy. In the case of WEF, 54% of the women that we have funded are in the informal sector. The department also works in collaboration with various civil society organizations, including women's rights, youth, widows' rights, disability, and research organizations whose mandate specifically addresses several concerns based on the inequalities experienced by groups facing multiple forms of discrimination. We acknowledge that these organizations are important partners in the department, project implementation, and policy formulation on gender issues and gender mainstreaming programs. Also, the government continues to take measures to address inherent biases, structural barriers, exclusions, and practices, and to make institution structures and policies more gender responsive in order to create an enabling environment for full and effective participation and decision-making for women in public life. As a country, we have made steady progress in enhancing women's participation in decision-making and public life, notably evident in key positions held by women as follows. In the executive, the number of women have increased from 18.8% in 2012 to 33.3% in 2021. In the legislature, women represent 22% of elected members and 18% of nominated positions in the National Assembly. In the judiciary, we are aware that the Deputy Chief Justice and the Chief Registrar are women. And also in the constitutional offices, we have women heading 7 constitutional offices. And that indicates that we are making progress as a country in terms of building leadership for women. And we align ourselves to the fact that the moment a woman is empowered, then generally life begins. And we hope that the women in top positions are going to look at the women in the informal sector to build their capacity and also ensure that the women in the informal sector are able to engage. Additionally, steps have been undertaken in the country in the inclusion of gender indicators in the performance contracting with accountability mechanism for compliance, and also Women's Empowerment Index that was developed is critical tool for monitoring the country's progress and, more importantly, for evidence-based policy making. The government is committed to ending gender-based violence and creating an enabling environment for measures put in place to address human rights violation against women and girls. Despite the progress made, representation at the elective level still remains elusive, patriarchal nature of Kenyan society, sociocultural norms and discriminatory practices, violence against women in public life, and limited innovation and use of technology, as well as limited resources, remain a challenge in our country. Let us take advantage of this golden opportunity of celebrating CSW at home and make it better and more inclusive for all women as we identify the gaps and the opportunities for women in the informal sector to benefit. I look forward to the outcome of the deliberation and implementation of the agreed actions towards the realization of women and their full and effective participation in decision-making in public life, as well as elimination of all forms of violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth, for shedding insights onto the initiatives that the State Department of Gender has rolled out just to ensure that women are empowered, and not just empowered in terms of from a technical.
I'm going online. I'm going online.
Requesting us to kindly mute ourselves. Thank you, Ruth. Just looking at the initiatives that the State Department of Gender has rolled out, and you've spoken much around, the enterprise, Women Economic Enterprise Fund, and how we've had, of women benefit from that particular fund. So even as we mark this year's celebrations, one of the key things we are looking at is in what ways can we already have the State Department of Gender also zero in on women who are within the informal sector, so their voice can be heard in formulation of some of the policies that are out there, and also just listening in what are some of the struggles they encounter, so that then we are able to bring them up into public participation in terms of decision making. At this point in time, my colleague, who is our gender and technical specialist. She's done lots of work around women economic empowerment. So she'll just take us through a slide session on what has been the contributions of women within the informal workforce, and what are the key things we need to put into consideration as we seek to magnify the voice of women in leadership. Over to you, Nduta.
Thank you, Carol, and good morning to everybody. I will take us briefly through a few slides that will help us to understand the context of informality in Kenya, and also help us gain insights on women's representation in employment and in leadership within the informal economy. Now, the informal economy, as you can see within this slide, it represents all work by individuals or businesses by which law or practice is not sufficiently catered for, either because they do not have formal arrangements, they are neither taxed nor monitored, and the government does not really take care of them. Informal workers include street vendors, domestic workers, industrial outworkers, and others, just like Ruth has outlined in her speech. And evidence has shown that women are overrepresented within the informal economy, and this is a global phenomenon. As we can see on this slide, in South Asia, 95% of women are employed within the informal sector. In Sub-Saharan Africa, they stand at around 89%, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, they're at 59%. In Kenya, 88% of women-owned businesses are operate within the informal sector. And the informal sector also employs quite a huge workforce, up to 84%. Now, these statistics are very important because they help us to understand the significance of the informal economy in terms of supporting livelihoods, and also when we're talking about a country's development and economic agenda, and how the informal economy is able to contribute to that. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, when we look further into the job context for women within the informal economy, we find that the informal sector workers do not benefit from labor and other social protections. So the sector is characterized by insecure terms of work, unsafe working conditions, and the employees who are within the sector lack important protections such as health insurance and maternity leaves. We also find that informality comes with its own challenges. For example, informal traders will have limited access to finance, And perhaps due to lack of proper documentation, they're also not able to access credit facilities. So they miss out on important business development services that are available to the formal sector, and also miss out on available markets that they would use to sell their products. Importantly is that the informal sector voices also miss out in the national policy debates, because more often than not, the traders have limited capacities, and also because they are more focused on the microsystems, whereas the policy development agenda mostly focuses on the macroeconomic system areas. We saw that in the wake of the COVID-19, there were serious disruptions which were witnessed, resulting to socio-economic crisis that affected individuals, households, and even communities, not only here in Kenya, but globally. Now, the informal sector was not spared either by the pandemic. And when the restrictions were put in by the government, the informal traders were the first ones to lose their jobs, and their jobs were just basically affected. They lost income, and their livelihoods were affected. Now, the closure of schools and having to take care of the sick family members also heaped onto the care burden of women who were within the informal sector, and some of them were unable to continue with their jobs. Some of the families also used up some of the savings they had put on just to support themselves. So a lot of the women were also not able to go back to their feet when COVID hit. Also during the COVID time, immediately it hit, most of the businesses went online. And because of the, we know there's a gender digital divide, and there's low technological education or know-how, especially among women within rural settings. So informal traders were also unable to continue with the businesses because they had no platform, or they had no gadgets or they had no ability to put up the tools, the online tools, for them to be able to continue with their businesses. In this time, we also saw a rise in the gender-based violence reports. In Kenya specifically, we saw a rise in teenage pregnancies, and there were a lot of negative sexual reproductive health and rights outcomes that included unsafe abortions, and women were unable to access important SRH services such as family planning. Next slide, please. Thank you. At ICRW, we took a closer look at women in leadership in the informal sector. And like many other sectors and workplaces, we found that leadership within the informal economy is largely male dominated, and that gender inclusion is rarely a consideration, especially for leadership structures. And we also found that deeply rooted social and gender norms have also found their way into the sector, where men are seen to be the ones who have time to go for meetings. So mostly they are the ones who are selected for leadership. And this has locked a lot of women from participating in important decision-making processes that affect their businesses and that affect their lives. The care burden continues to affect women, and because of the need to balance between the reproductive roles and the productive roles, the household and childcare responsibilities, women are rarely included in leadership structures within the informal economy, as we've also seen within the other sectors. We also find that the constitutions within the sector that normally guide operations, the trust deeds and the terms of references that guide operations within the informal sector, they rarely say anything about gender inclusion. And so when women continue to get conveniently excluded from decision-making and from participating on important decisions that would impact on their businesses and also enable them to thrive within the industry. Women also shy off from leadership because of intimidation and harassment from their male colleagues and counterparts. And this has also been seen to contribute to their limited participation within leadership. Now with that, I bring it to a close. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you, Nduta, for sharing those insights and how COVID has impacted on women's contribution in terms of leadership and some of the vulnerabilities that have also been exacerbated because of COVID. So at this point in time, allow me to introduce our panel experts, just to give us insights on how is it that we as a nation have attempted or made efforts towards empowering women to take up leadership opportunities. So at this point, I'll again invite, just introduce briefly Ruth Randa, who oversees marketing, research, and communication functions at the Women Enterprise Fund, a state agency that offers a credible credit to women entrepreneurs for enterprise development. Ruth Randa is an experienced strategist, and she has, over the last 10 years, greatly contributed towards the significant milestones that have been made by the Women Economic Enterprise Fund. And as she has mentioned in her previous submission, we've had 54% of women really benefiting from some of the funds that have been rolled out by government. And she believes in life begins when a woman is empowered. So thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us today. Next is Mary Moudoni, who is the president and CEO of the Women in Business Community Network in Kenya. Mary is a champion of financial inclusion and investment, expansion of market growth, mentorship and policy advocacy, and she's the current holder of the African Business Leaders Award in regard to gender. So it's really great having you today, Mary, as you're able to share with us insights on how your network has continued to champion for the voice of women as you mentor them into taking up leadership positions. We are also joined by Naomi Wandera, who is an ICRW senior gender and research specialist, and she has over 20 years experience in undertaking public health research, advocacy, and policy engagement initiatives. She's done lots of work in education, violence, prevention of violence against women, children, and girls, economic empowerment, and her expertise covers gender equality, social norms, rights, and inclusion. So today, Naomi will be on how leadership by women stems right from the cultural foundation and the patriarchal society that we are living in, and what are those things that we need to put into consideration as we aspire to have more women occupy different positions of leadership. We also have with us today Frida Mwaniki, who is the National Secretary General for Micro and Small Enterprises Foundation. And she has really been instrumental in creating structures around the country in which the informal sector can tap credit facilities, the government's MSCE credit guarantee scheme, and also women economic empowerment initiatives, especially by women within the private sector. We are also joined in by a representative from the State Department of Industrialization, the only man on the panel. Thank you, Mr. Moudoni. We have gender champions out there, and he is one of them. And he's representing today the State Department of Industrialization, a department that has very many functions that, you know, they have been discharging over the years. And this includes formulation, coordination, and implementation of national industrialization policies, facilitation of the development and enforcement of standards, provision of an enabling environment for domestic and foreign direct investments, because we are not just looking at women occupying leadership positions in Kenya, but also globally. So this department also looks at how, you know, to create an enabling environment to enable women to thrive as well. And lastly, promoting development of industrial tooling and machining. So even as we start off our panel discussions today, I will reach out to Ruth Randa from the Women Enterprise Fund, just to give us insights, Ruth, on what would you say have been the obstacles faced by women working in the informal economy? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Women in the informal, working in the informal economy have experienced various obstacles. And because we work with them on a daily basis at the Women Enterprise Fund, one of the major obstacles that we have noted is inadequate technical skills, literacy, and lack of opportunity for acquiring, for acquiring new skills. We realize that as men move up through their education and through their jobs, women tend to hold their traditional roles. And therefore that hinders them to take up the roles that they're expected to do in the economy. There's also lack of information about the workers because they tend to be more scattered. A minute.
minute as we can move on to the next panelist. We'll get back to you, Ruth, and sorry about that. As we just continue with the thought process in terms of the norms, in what ways would you say the prevalent gender norms impact on women's involvement in leadership? Hello, Naomi?
I'm sorry about that connection. Internet is a bit slow. So yes, gender norms are, one of the key things that affect women's participation in leadership at in different spheres, whether it's business, whether it's politics, even in families. So we do know that in Kenya, there is a huge issue around women's access to land and property rights. And we also know that for many businesses to succeed, people need access to land and property to present as security, to secure loans. Now, most women in the informal sector actually, they are small, they are low-income people, they trade in, they have very small capital, they have little access and control over property. So they may not have, the power to actually present, for example, a land title to a bank to access a loan to be able to operate. So that keeps their business.
I think Naomi seems to have dropped off. We'll just carry on. Ruth, are you able to continue with your contributions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Carol. As I indicated, that many women in the informal sector have inadequate technical know-how. And even as an institution, what we have done, capacity building is an element that is critical before we lend to the women in the informal sector. So the women are taken through training so that then they appreciate the opportunities that are available for them to participate in. The other challenge we have experienced is lack of information. Most of the women do not take up, do not know, because they do not know, they are not able to take up, identify the opportunities that that are available within the environment, so that then they can be able to fully participate and also just be able to enhance their skills and be able to do business in a better way. We realize also that the legal and the policy environment is very punitive to the women in the informal sector. They do not have a voice because for them to be heard, they are more or less operate in a scattered way. So, and therefore, to get their voices together becomes very difficult. And even the supply chains do not meet to understand exactly what is it that these women in the informal sector require. They are on equal terms, and even the legal rights, the bargaining power is curtailed, because then without a voice, it becomes very difficult to organize some policy framework to cover you and also be able to address your issues. We also realize that there is absence for workers' rights and social protection. There's greater vulnerability of these workers who are outside to reach in the labor legislation or trade unions. And mainly, women are found in those traditional and organized units as they face these difficulties. As a fund, what we have done is we collaborate with the social services so that these women come and form themselves into groups. Once they form themselves into groups, they are able to benefit from the products and the services that are available at the Women Enterprise Fund, and also just build their capacity and link them to institutions that are able also to take them to the next level in terms of their training, the technical skills, so that they move from where they are and at least they can be able to appreciate in terms of the livelihoods within their families and also within their economic setup. And because of the social and patriarchal nature of our society, there's this assumption that women are naturally, caregivers. So because of their multiple identities, women will tend to shy off. They shy off from taking opportunities that are available for them. So institutions need to go out of their way and make deliberate interventions so that then women in the informal sector are brought to speed so that they're able to partake of the available opportunities that have been set out to benefit the women in the informal sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Frida, just reaching out to you in following to the discussions that Ruth raises around the perceptions women have and some of the fears that they also experience in making determination whether or not to engage in leadership positions. From your experience in working with these women, what are some of those barriers that continue to hinder their representation in leadership within the informal sector? Frida.
Hello.
Hi.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Frida, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a small clarity on my introduction. I am the Secretary General for Micro and Small Federation, Enterprises Federation, not Foundation. So the challenges that we women get in a representation, they are mega, and there are things that we cannot just ignore. We have lack of statistics on women in the informal sector. This is by and large when women do their businesses, you find out that most are not even recorded, even in the Bureau of Statistics, the KRA and such. So that puts women at some point which has no recognition. Women involvement in negatively referred words like illegal or informal. These are such language also preconditions them from the society and also demoralize women representation in the activities. We also have limited access to market information. We have unfair competition from the gender, insufficient capital to investment and presentation. We also have culture barriers, which force women to be docile, amiable, and not aggressive like our opposite gender. So women in the informal sector are also left out to access to social protection. You find women you're given labors or you do jobs that are less pay and less skilled. And because of how a woman is brought up, you have to take it up because of your family and stuff like that. An equal gender distribution of domestic and reproductive tax means women carry double burden. You have to be in the family and also you have to do your work. So basically that's it.
Thank you. You've given us insights from a gender perspective, and thank you so much just for looking at the double burden of care that women have and how this also impedes on their leadership involvement. Over to you, Mr. Moudoni. From the policy perspective, what are some of the policies that the government has put in place to ensure and also to guarantee that women are able to tap into the opportunities, be it within the informal sector or within the business environment?
Thank you, Chair, for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Moudoni. We Okay, I can see you're trying to another space. Hello, we'll get back to you, Mr. Moudoni. Just once you're, let me know once you're sorted. We can then go back to Naomi. Naomi, any additions to what Frida has talked about insofar as gender norms and how these continue to, impact on women's participation in leadership?
So, Carol, thank you very much. Again, apologies, I've missed what my colleagues have said. But give me a cue if you're hearing. I'm not going to switch on the video. But I wanted to, to continue and say that our registration system in terms of policies does not recognize women like chattels, and most women actually have personal items that can be used as collateral in banks. That would be important alongside advocating for women's access to land and property rights, ensuring that they have access to land registration, to jointly owning property with spouses, addressing inheritance issues. Women cannot even inherit their own homes where they live.
Hello, Naomi, we seem to have lost you.
As at policy level, that women would have the power and the tools to be able to advance in leadership. There is also the issue that women generally lack knowledge, the tools, and the skills to advocate at policy level. Sometimes they do not have the skills to analyze the data that's available within their context for them to be able to actually articulate the issues that affect them. So there is for women-led organizations, for women entrepreneurs to be able to be trained and empowered to collect and analyze data on indicators that can continue to inform them about what's happening in their situation, what's hindering them, what are the barriers, so that then they can advocate, and I would say collectively advocate at all levels, whether it's at the village, local level, whether it's in the county governments, and whether it's at parliamentary level, at national level. So that is very important for evidence-based, evidence-informed policy advocacy. Do I still have time? Yeah.
Okay, Naomi, we can move on to Mary, just to look at, we've heard of the very many opportunities and initiatives that have been rolled out across the country by different departments, different players. And Mary, in your role within the Women in Business chapter and networking opportunities, we still see that women continuing to be locked out of the various, engagements or places where their voices can be heard. So from your perspective, in what ways have you created networking opportunities for women's advancement in leadership? Mary.
Thank you very much for that question. I think this is a very timely meeting to discuss on what are the areas we can leverage on in terms of networking opportunities and ensuring that the women stay afloat without sinking. So in our case, what we have done is to create more awareness and conversation on gender, which is surely a good thing. And we say it is not noise making. Masking probably a lack of real action and progress is what we can call noise. So we've created a lot of awareness. We've done basically a lot of communication. We've used many communication channels to reach to each and every woman, whether it is the woman at the bottom of the pyramid or it is the woman who we look up to at the policy level. Then the other thing that we have done is to attract and develop more women into leadership roles. And this requires sensitization to companies wide, attracting more women to challenge themselves, to move to another level, and to feel that they are confidently there because they deserve it, not because they have been pushed or anything else. So we have put together a range of companies which we have had conversations with and requested them to allow more and more women to take up leadership positions. And leadership positions does not just mean it is being given assignments that can take, that as a woman, I can use my skills to be able to showcase what I have or what I can be able to do. Then the other thing that we've also done is to encourage on retention, succession, and addressing the skills gap and committing to inclusion. And these are some of the ways organizations can challenge the status quo. Retaining women, even on policy level, you can be able, sometimes is when we see women, when they make a mistake in an organization, or your two of you, a gentleman has made a mistake and a lady has made a mistake, you might find that the gentleman can be retained and the lady is kicked out. So we have encouraged a lot this retention in our in companies, and also planning on succession so that women can get prepared to know at what point in time am I supposed to take up the leadership roles of this company without necessarily feeling that I am not adequate. And of course, addressing the gender gap, addressing the skill gap, and committing to inclusion.
Thank you.
The skill gap, that is, yes?
Thank you. We'll have Mr. Moudoni just build on to what you've alluded to in terms of the opportunities and looking at it from a policy perspective as well. We'll get back to you, Mary. Mr. Moudoni, kindly continue with your submissions on the policies that have been made to strengthen women's engagement within the non-traditional sector. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Now, as I said, my name is Samuel Moudoni from the Department of Investigation. I've had a long experience in the civil service. I've worked in the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm currently the Minister of Investigation. And I've had an interaction outside.
Mr. Moudoni, kindly increase your volume a bit. You're faint.
Oh, my volume, that is the maximum that it can get to. I don't know.
Oh, okay, kindly continue.
Okay. Now, I want to start with the opportunities available for our ladies or our women in the country, and the initiatives that the government is putting in place to empower women in the business. Now, one of them that has been forgotten by my colleagues is that it's a presidential directive that all government institutions, 30% of their procurement services must be given to youth, women, and the people with disabilities. Unfortunately, this initiative has not been taken up very well. And then now that one should look at what else can be done so that we bring in as many of these people as possible so that they can take up this activity. So now, the ministry has developed an initiative that where we are establishing what we call the center or business centers across the country to the 8 regions or more with a lot of support, with some support, we go to many places. Now, this one solution, what is purpose is to enable women and the youth and any other person in the small, that is macro and small enterprises industry, so that they can get their businesses integrated. That is, if they have a unique product, so that it can get into a commercial scale. Then now we at the same center we have what we use the standard coding that the standardize the product so that they match other products like the market so that they can be marketed. Then at the same time at the same center we have institutions like the city that is if you have a unique product that you need from other people copying you. Now, we have talked about the women having issues. This is not the issue right now, because at the same center, at the third center, we have Kenya industrial system. This government has people that financial issues in this country, the team of 15 years. This one is what they do now. They have developed a product that can help women. They have to be in groups. Now it is not a question of trying to look at the radio that so now this one they can form a group so that they can guarantee one another and then they can get the financial that they need to grow their business. Then at the same center, you still have CRA. CRA is there to assist them to understand how we go about their sector. So what we are here is many of these here, they have been made informal for many years because of fear to because they know CRA in development we are trying to use by that. By getting the CRA expert, that is Kenya Revenue Authority, to the comparison so that they can be used by the need about the succession so that they can formalize their businesses. Then they take up the directive that can be 30% initiative, 30% initiative of all government procurement, all government procurement, given 30% of them, the local ones, women and the youth and the people with disabilities must given priority. In terms of financing, the
Thanks, Moudoni. Hello? Yes, just thank you so much for your contributions because you're taking us into the next area of discussion. I'll be getting back to you because you've started talking about the opportunities, and that's one of the key things that we are also seeking to discuss. So allow me get back to you shortly. Frida, looking at the work that you've been doing within the network and the foundation, one of the key things that we really like for you to speak towards is in what ways are women continuing to work as influencers? What opportunities exist for the women? Just in 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay. First, I would like to make a clarity here for even women to understand that there's a clear confusion on what is MSE and SME. This SME is a small and medium enterprise, which has the micro missing. In the SME description, just as medium is missing in the definition of the micro and small enterprises. Informal businesses cannot exist in the small sector because of the definitions of the MSE Act, which was brought up in the 2012. By the time a business is small, it has been formalized. So small businesses are defined as businesses that have between 10 to 50 employees. That is very important for women to know. And businesses that have between 500,000 to 5 million in terms of annual turnover. So as in MSEF, what we tell women and what I would love women to know is that they have a voice, and their voice is it is well represented, especially if you hook yourself up with associations or federations that can bulge you into the governmental issues that benefits that are given by the government, like the funds that are given to women, and the allocation of the tender are there for women. So it is always good for women to understand this. So this is very important, because in most cases we hear people confusing the MSE and the SME. It is very, very important. Yeah. Carol, you're muted.
Apologies, my apologies. What are some, in a view, what is that one opportunity that women can maximize as influencers?
Okay.
We'll give you a minute to reflect.
Advocacy. Hello?
Advocacy.
You can hear me? Advocacy.
Yes. Thank you. So over to you, Mary. You've talked about, the training and facilitation initiatives women in business have been exposed to, from discussions around opportunities for these women. From your perspective, what are the training and development skills that are needed to build more women into leadership? Hello, Mary? Hello, Mary, are you able to hear me?
Hello?
Yes, Mary, did you hear my question?
Okay, please come again. I think my internet was really, yeah. Thank you.
We understand, we understand. So we're looking at from your engagement with women within the business networks, from your, in terms of opportunities, what are those training and development of opportunities that need to be availed for women to, enable them grow into positions of leadership?
One of the key things that we really need to look into around the women in business and for their growth into leadership, one of it is a self or team development. Sometimes when you're running a company, you need to have the development skills so that even your employees can buy into your vision, mission, and agenda for whatever thing that you're running in your company. Self-development is also very critical, because you cannot lead a pack when you yourself do not have eyes. So it would be very much important that you are the first person who takes the step to develop. And that means education-wise, it means in networks, you need to have be way ahead of everybody else in terms of network. Then the other thing that is very critical also is strategic thinking. When you're running business, you must be strategic in one way or another. For instance, right now we have had COVID. We've been stricken by the pandemic, and COVID has really put down almost all our businesses. But does that mean that you remain on the floor? Really? You must be very strategic in the way that you operate. If one way closes, then you must know that that is not the end of the day. You must wake up, dust yourself, and move, even if it means changing the sector. It is not a do or die that you must always be a shopkeeper. You can change and become a manufacturer, and those are the things that we are talking about when we talk about strategic thinking or strategic skills in one way or another. Then again, the innovative ways of handling issues. You don't have to remain analog through and through. When the whole global fraternity is moving digital, you're still thinking that my word of mouth is the very best. There must be other innovative ways of attracting your customers. You must have innovative ways of capturing what is happening nationally, globally, so that you remain afloat. Remember, as a woman, there is nobody who will come and buy from you because you're a woman. They will buy from you because your product is good. Money knows no gender, and so does business. Yeah. So that is the fact that we have to live with. And as women, we must keep inventing, reinventing ourselves and gaining innovative ways to capture 3 times more than what men are doing.
Thank you so much, Mary. And my take home is money has no gender, it knows no gender. Yeah. So basically, yes. It's, the innovation and the creativity and basically looking at opportunities and how we as women can then be able to maximize on the opportunities that present for us. So even as we wrap up the discussion, I will just go back to each of our panelists to give us in 1 minute, give us a closing remark on what would be your call to action on the steps necessary to specifically move women into leadership within the informal economy. So I'll start us off by Ruth Randa, your call to action in 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. My call to action for women is that leadership is a team sport. We must share common goals, a strong sense of collective endeavor, and face the same direction, however these may prove to be. Therefore, we need to leave no woman behind. Let us work all together, for we know where we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Moudoni, your call to action. You're quite faint.
Oh, as I'm saying, there are many opportunities women can take up that I see presented by the government. For me, they can want to get out of opinion and then issue of being this other is an issue that is interest them more and deep. Most of them are not ready to take it. And if you don't really take it, you can't grow. You can't get off the floor as one of the big makers in the family.
Thank you, Mr. Moudoni. Over to you, Frida, your call to action.
Okay, my call to action is to tell women to get involved in leadership and not to get afraid. And I also want to take this juncture to congratulate Her Excellency, Mama Samia Suluhu, for being the first woman president in East Africa and Tanzania. The voice of women is heard at the highest level of this region. So we really congratulate her, and women, let's follow those footsteps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frida. Over to you, Naomi, for your closing remarks and call to action.
So I'll pick on what my colleague Ruth has said about not remaining analog. And let's empower women, let us empower ourselves to recognize how gender-based violence actually happens online. So there's a lot of sexual gender-based violence online where leaders actually maybe feel attacked and they give up because their person is humiliated, their families come into the picture. So they find themselves really not coping. So let's learn to identify those things that actually discourage women from advancing, from utilizing the digital spaces and bridging the digital gap. And again, let's use the tools. Let's start collecting evidence on how that happens and where it happens and how it manifests and how it impacts women, so that policymakers can actually have the evidence to work with at policy level.
Thank you, Naomi. Over to you, Mary. What would be your call to action, even as you're looking at the digital divide that still persists and the various opportunities that have been presented out there for women, yet there are obstacles that still remain. So what would be your closing remarks to this discussion this morning?
Thank you very much. My closing remark is visibility is very key for any woman globally. And visibility comes with the voice. We don't just want to hear the women voices. We also want to put the face to the voice. We want to give a name to who is speaking. Otherwise, even the other gender can come and pretend to speak like us, and it will be taken because it's a woman's voice. It's a shrill voice, probably. So visibility is very key. Let us come out. Let us show up.
Thank you so much. So the key takeaways we had today is around, the social and gender norms that remain to be obstacles. There are platforms out there that have been created for women to be able to tap into, but we need to be able to empower the women to spread their wings and to tap into these opportunities, enabling them to have their voices heard in different environments. And again, as we move towards the digital platform, realizing the gaps that are there, and how then do we ensure that the environment is also made enabling to the women, in as much as we're also protecting them from further exploitation as they venture into the digital platforms. So at this point, I will hand over to my colleague, Eric Yegon, to take us through the question and answer session before we wrap up today's discussion. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for your insights, and we are really glad to have had you on today's session. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Carol, and the panelists for very insightful conversations. I have seen Ambassador has raised her hands. If you can raise that question, Ambassador Anna. Are you able to unmute yourself? Anne Wanjohi? Okay, as we're waiting for Ambassador to raise her, to unmute herself. So there are comments that have come, one from Pauline from Rural Women Network, basically talking about focusing on women, smallholder agricultural producers. Let's remember agricultural production is a business too, and women producers need support. Then in the chat box, I'm looking at the chat box. So thank you for the webinar. Other barriers to women leadership and informal sector, i.e. confusing legal framework in reference to laws and laws that support women's and property and land rights. Often there is poor awareness of these laws by women and existing power structures. I think Naomi talked about this. Maybe Naomi, do you want to respond to that comment? Feel free to unmute yourself. So there's a comment about a confusing legal framework in reference to laws that support women's property and land rights. So in your presentation, you talked about that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Eric. So in most financial institutions, accessing collateral, accessing loans means having acceptable collateral. And most collateral is in form of property or land. Now, when we talk about, property ownership, most land transfers, for example, you find when land is registered by a married man, but it's accepted that you only register in only his names, and the wife is not a co-owner, but rather is registered as a witness. So most women do not actually have rights over property which they assume they owned. So that's why the interface between, the law and the social cultural norms, come together as drivers of, women's disempowerment. So it is very important for evidence to come up, for women to collect information, how this is actually manifesting. Then advocacy can be pursued either through women collectives, when women get together and advocate together, either maybe at the bank level. It's possible to make a shift and get these women the support they need, the capital they need, so that they can also build their asset bases. The issue of control over property is also, it's even when it's legally, provided for, implementation needs to be looked at. What happens when land is transferred in absence of a spouse, for example, a female spouse, and yet maybe she had already been allowed to use that land as collateral, but then because of the lack of decision-making power, joint decision-making in relationships, you may find when the male spouse decides that, you know what, I now want to sell the land, so they go ahead with the land. So that drives the lady or the female business woman into debt. They may fail to be able to pay back some of the loans, the credit that they have received using that land as well. So there are many issues around land and property ownership, around property registration. Can we have business networks which are supported and which can maybe start to advocate for personal property to also be recognized? These women in the informal sectors don't need hundreds of millions to run their businesses. They need, they need just a little amount of money to be able to continue being profitable and sustaining their families.
Okay.
So what I would say about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have two questions, and I've seen Lillian has raised her hand. So there's a question for Ms. Ruth Randa. And the question is from Federico Bisiello. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Apologize for that. So the question is about a women enterprise fund. Is there information on access to these funds has changed? And if so, how? Since the beginning of the pandemic? And that's a question for you, Ruth Randa. And then there's a question from Lillian to all the panelists. How will the women in the grassroots be elevated to be able to put their face to the voices? So those are the two questions. Maybe we'll start with Lillian Randa and on the first question about women women WEF and WESO Fund.
Thank you very much. The access of the funds has drastically changed because of the pandemic. How the funds are disbursed is at the constituency level. So we have 290 constituency officers who have the mandate to train and onboard the women into the system. But because of the pandemic and the restrictions that were given through the MOH protocols, the fund had to look into ways of how best do we ensure that we continue to disburse the money to the women, and therefore technology came in handy. So we have a portal where women can log into, request for training, and officers are able to engage with the women, able to undertake the training, as well as even find out the extent, as in the progress of their loan application. So once you key in, you're able to know where your application is in terms of the processing stages. So that has helped a lot of the women to be able to just keep in touch with the fund, even despite the situation that we were experiencing during the COVID period. And just to mention that what the fund also did was we had to restructure the loans because they come with terms. A lot of women businesses were affected, and therefore repaying their loans was going to be a tall order. So we restructured the loans based on what the conditions that the women businesses were experiencing. And that gave women a window, a relief for them to be able to repay their loans with ease. Yeah. So in terms of access, that has been continuous. It is work in progress, because initially we were used to the traditional way of having to meet women. We go through the normal process, but now the technology has really assisted in terms of the access to the funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, the message I'm hearing is that the Women Enterprise Fund and Ways of Fund at the constituency level, and also during the COVID period, basically restructuring the repayment of those loans. So very dynamic way of looking at things when the situation caused by COVID happened. So there is a question that Lillian Maro has asked about how women in the grassroots be elevated to be able to put their face to the voices. I'll pose this to any of the panelists.
Thank you. I think let me jump in here and say something about women at the grassroots level. And this is women, both rural women as well as women working in the informal sector in urban areas. Simply because they are traditionally not heard. Sometimes we we overlook them. And these are the women who Naomi and Ruth and Frida and all the others have been talking about. If they don't have voice, we sometimes even forget, or our policy and decision makers forget to even think about policies for these women. Now, I think at the grassroots level, we also need to be educating women everywhere. We need to let women know that it's good, they need to run their businesses, but there needs to be a level of formalization. For me, I think the lack of formalization keeps a lot of these women and their entrepreneurial activities in the dark, under the radar, and then also unable to benefit from a lot of the strategies and the loans and all the other opportunities that might be available. So formalization is very important. But we are also hearing, and we are seeing, and our research is also showing, that the legal and regulatory frameworks are also very confusing and difficult to navigate. So what we need is to also think about how can, and it has been mentioned by some of our panelists today and some of the experts, how can we actually ease the way of doing business? How can we make it easier to formalize businesses? How can we be thinking about tax brackets and tax incentives that actually benefit women and smaller businesses and these quote unquote informally owned businesses? Because if you look like in Kenya, the recent digital tax, we've talked about women being challenged because they may not have the digital literacy of their peers, so they couldn't even jump onto the digital marketplace during COVID-19. But now with the digital taxes that are also proposed and being brought into place, it might actually cause some of these digital businesses or these digital-based businesses to die. So we need a regulatory framework and a legal framework that speaks to each other and that also looks at the needs of small businesses, of informal businesses, and eases the way of moving from informality to formality. So I think this is how you get the voices at the grassroots being heard, because without a legitimate seat, or what is quote unquote seen as a legitimate seat at the table, it becomes very difficult for your voice to be heard. So for me, I would say formalization, ease of doing business, and ease of formalization is very important. Thank you. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Cleo. So there's a comment from Diana Warira about experience from Ethiopia, where the government is empowering pastoralist communities by allowing them to use movable assets like livestock for borrowing. I know recently Parliament passed a law about being able to use household products for collateral. It's something that probably you need to look at, but the question is about who owns those household goods that could be used for collateral. So thank you very much. There's a question for Ruth that Lillian has posed that she should have asked earlier about why is it that an individual woman who can afford a collateral be allowed to take a loan alone? The group thing is killing a lot of loan intake. Some disappear. And then probably, if Ruth, you can respond to that. And then Mary, there's a question from Pacifica about what efforts are being made to bulk and market women products, especially in the informal sector. If we can respond to those two questions, and then we bring this question and answer session to an end. So Ruth, the requirement for women to be in a group, and if she's able to provide collateral without being in a group.
Thank you, Eric. I would like to say that yes, we focused more on groups because we were trying to build the capacity of women at the lowest pyramid. But the good news is that we currently have individual loan products that we already received concurrence from National Treasury, just waiting for money to be disbursed. So we have asset financing for individual women. We have Kilimo loan and Biashara loans for women, and even for individual women within groups to co-guarantee each other. So these are products that we roll out in the next financial year. That is in July, from July this year. Any individual woman can walk into the fund and we will be able to give you a loan as an individual woman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Mary, a question about the efforts being made to bulk and market women's product, especially in the informal sector. Or any of the panelists who can handle that, and then we bring it to an end.
Okay. I can attempt to answer that or
Sure.
give the solutions that are workable out here. At the moment, for bulk access to markets, which is very critical right now, is to ensure that there's aggregation of products at either a particular point and get a particular buyer. And one of the things that we have been able to do as women in business is to find contracts with bigger companies, which are able to uptake bigger bulks of products. And one of such companies is Bidco Africa, which has is having contractual farming for sunflower, soya, and bamboo for women, specifically for women. And this is helping women in particular areas to even change, become innovative, and think of other ways of getting money, because there's already access to market. So a sunflower alone, it takes about 3 months. So you very well know that if I plant this and it is it's time for harvest, I already have the market. And the other way is to ensure that we do not we have now aggregated aggregation centers or areas where the women from a particular area can put their products together for a particular person to come for it. And one such thing which I have seen it happening and working is with the avocado farmers, whereby you may not go for one sack of avocado from Kisii, but you can have 100 of them from 100 different people. And of course, the money is paid to the farmer directly. And the final one is going digital, because you're likely to also get buyers who require bulk products, or a service that requires a huge amount of money. And that is where people like Ruth Randa comes in, because they have to fund the LPOs and ensure that the women do not get stuck when they really need the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I can see there are a number of comments in the chat box. Thank you very much. We would, when we share the slide, the recording, you'll be able to see all that. We'll take all those questions, and then we'll see, we'll find out of getting back to you. So thank you very much. I would bring this to an end and ask Dr. Cleopatra Moudoni to give her final remarks before we bring it to a close. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this webinar. I'd like to thank all our speakers for their insights, Ruth, Mary, Frida, Mr. Moudoni, Naomi, and Carol and Nduta for sharing the data that we have out there. I think when it comes to women in the informal sector, there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities for growth, and also a lot of opportunities for leadership. There have been a lot of questions that have been asked and insights that have been shared. I think something that we may need to discuss in the future is a bit more about the movable assets that banks can use as collateral, because something that was not noted here is there actually is a Movable Assets Act. I think it's of 2017 in Kenya, but how banks are using it is something we need to discuss, because this really would be helpful for women business owners. So the role of women in the informal sector is large. I think we need to work towards formalizing a lot of these businesses. We need to work towards movement building, and also growing the voices of women in the sector, because as Mary has said, and as Ruth has also indicated, that there are many opportunities that that women can take when they have the information, when they have the skills necessary, and also when the context and the framework is actually one that encourages their growth. It is very possible. We should not forget the informal economy when we are thinking about our policies, because as we have also heard, the informal economy employs a huge number of Kenyans and of Africans, and its intersection also with the formal economy, it cannot be ignored. So it will continue to be a source of livelihoods for millions of people, and if we want women to not only succeed, not only survive, but to thrive in this sector, we need to create frameworks, we need to create opportunities, and we also need to give voice and create spotlights where we can share the success stories of women. So more research is required, more data is required, as Frida mentioned. Where is the data? Where is the evidence? We need to be looking at how women in the informal economy are actually contributing to our economies, because maybe then that is when we will begin to see more focus being given to these women and these women-owned businesses. I'd like to thank you for your time, and thank you for the great discussion, everybody. And wherever you are, have a very good day. Thank you from ICRW. We look forward to interacting again. Bye-bye.